Good afternoon and welcome to Track 2, The Art and Science of Learning. I'm Vipul Rathore, Chief Content Officer at Harappa Education, and I'm your host for Track 2 at Bridge. We're excited to kick things off today with an important colloquy on measuring impact, waiting for Godot. But before I introduce the moderator for this session, an important reminder. During the session, if you have any questions for our panelists, please be sure to post them in the Q&A box. And on that note, let's go ahead and meet our moderator, Dr. Dheeraj Sanghi, Vice Chancellor at JK Lakshmipat University. Good afternoon, Dr. Sanghi. Dr. Sanghi is a seasoned educationist with a long and distinguished stint as Professor of Computer Science at IIT Kanpur. He has also held positions such as the Dean of Academic Affairs and Dean of External Relations at Indraprasth Institute of Information Technology, Delhi. And he has also served as the Director of Punjab Engineering College. Welcome, Dr. Sanghi, and over to you.
Thank you, Vipul. It's a pleasure to be here. And this is really a very, very important session. But before I talk about the session, let me introduce my co-panelist, very distinguished panel. The first one is Shobhini Mukerji. She is Executive Director, Abdul Latif Jameel Poverty Action Lab, South Asia. She has been supervising over 40 plus pan-India research projects and policy engagements. Her work ranges from managing and designing large-scale data collection and analysis to advising organizations and governments on research design, monitoring, and evaluation strategies. She works closely with donors, policymakers, and research institutions, and has helped successfully scale many social programs. At Bridge, she brings her experience of transforming research into action to this colloquy. Welcome, Shobhini. We will soon be joined by another panelist. So maybe, I will introduce him as he joins. But before that, let me start with a description of what we are trying to achieve in the next 50 minutes. So the session is titled Measuring Impact, Waiting for Godot. So the idea is, many of you would have been hearing about various sessions since yesterday about various interventions. How can we improve quality of education? How can we make them ready for industry? How can we, do this or that, make sure that the students have better communication skills, students know technical skills better. But whatever intervention we do, is there a way to say this intervention is better than the other intervention, that this is the impact of this intervention, that students are really learning and so on? Now, at universities, we do take these exams at the end of the semester for the courses that we teach, and that does give us some sense of impact of the teaching in that semester. But that's really only about the scholastic things. What about other things like confidence, about ethics, about various other things that we do? What is the impact of various extracurricular activities? Right? If I want to recommend somebody a Harappa course, do I know what's the impact going to be of that Harappa course? Is this really making a difference? Now, this is a challenge that we have faced for centuries, and there is really no good solution. And that's why the title, Waiting for Godot. Are we just keep waiting for the ideal solution? Or there are things that we can do better today than what we could do 10 years ago? And I think having Shobhini here is really remarkable because she has done a lot of research in this area. So I will start with a question to her. How does this theme and title resonate with your own work? And, you have been working with this measuring impact over the last 2 decades. Is there something that we can do which will help us move forward? And you may speak for about 5 minutes, so I think let me also say the session is going to be, I'm going to request Shobhini to speak for 5 minutes about this title of the session, and then I'm going to ask the second speaker. And then we will have some internal questions based on what they have said. I will ask some questions. And at the end, please be ready with your questions, all the audience. Last 20 minutes will be audience questions and answers. Thank you. Over to you, Shobhini.
Thank you, Professor Sanghi. So there are I would say there are quite a few themes I can think about and touch upon when I think about the questions that you've asked and how you frame. So let me start with the basics of how we think about measurement. So measurements are not done in a silo, and it is imperative to involve the customer or the stakeholder or the various stakeholders that matter in the design of the program, and seek feedback on what you would call a product in business terms, which in this case would be our graduates. So I don't know as much about the higher education institutions and how they operate, but I would imagine that we don't take into account feedback from the job market once our graduates have been employed in a company. We might have a general sense, but nothing that can feedback directly to reshape our priors. So identifying success indicators at a macro level would help shape the design of the course to target knowledge and learning, and also should reflect the needs of a dynamic labor market. For instance, in using development research to shape policy, researchers are constantly working with policymakers to make sure that we are designing relevant interventions that have practical use for them. So there is a lot of iteration and feedback in the design and delivery, as well as in collecting some ongoing feedback in the initial phase. This is very much, I would say, the approach of Estragon in Waiting for Godot, if I have to go by the title of the panel, who represents, I would say, the more ideal existentialist portion of humanity, who chooses to stop waiting and construct the meaning of life based on experience in the tangible and the physical world around them. So in this case, the impact of a curriculum or a course on student learning and how the student will be placed in the job market later on requires one to first think of the theory of change. So how would you measure? It would ultimately depend on many factors. So how you measure will be guided by what you're measuring, which in turn depends upon the outcomes you prioritize in your theory of change when you design a particular course or a program. So what is your North Star here, right? So is it just increasing your class size of graduates or churning out, say, in your view, employable graduates, or is it ensuring 100% placements when they graduate? So ideally, organizations begin developing a theory of change when they first start designing a new program or course. The process of working backwards from the impact you aim to achieve to the initial inputs can help you define the activities needed to run a successful program and examine some key assumptions that the program is making. But most often, I think, organizations develop these theories of change after programs have already been operating, and they want to sort of tweak and something is not working. Let's see how do we do some inquiry in that. So while this is still a valuable exercise, it allows you to validate the program's logic. It helps to define each step in the implementation. It outlines the intended results, and it helps you make adjustments to the course. So in both cases, whether you do it before or after, a theory of change is often refined over a period of time as the program is implemented, usually in response to the data that is generated. This will also be influenced by shifts in the industry, the skills that the industry values, the ecosystem approach to enabling access to quality jobs and ensuring adaptability of your graduates to the changing demands of the labor market. So let me speak a few minutes about JPAL's approach and how we think about this. So JPAL's approach has been to measure impact of interventions and programs through it's a methodology called randomized control trials, borrowed from the medical sciences, to measure the impact of development programs and policies by focusing on very well-defined questions. And we try and be as rigorous in answering the questions in the real world. Let me explain very briefly what I mean. So if you think about the magnitude of the problem that we're faced with today and we're discussing, I'll take you back, several years. In the 1990s, about almost 1.9 billion people lived in extreme poverty, and over 8 million children died before their first birthday. So faced with this enormous problem, many people's reaction is to try not to think about it at all, or hope that somebody might find the magic bullet, or someone else will step in and tell them what to do. Again, like Velayat in Waiting for Godot. But this war against poverty is not to be won in one major battle, but a series of smaller efforts, no doubt with many setbacks along the way. So to assess progress, we use randomized evaluations as a methodology that allows researchers to vary just what they're interested in, leaving the rest constant, and therefore be driven by the question we want to ask. And when we apply this to a broader systems change approach, it's the what, when, who, how, where, they're all important, but it is important not to get overwhelmed by the magnitude of the problem, but break it down into smaller parts and tackle them one by one. And that's really what we do. So if you take the example of how you would look at the impact on a new course or a curriculum you want to introduce, say you have introduced a new curriculum that embeds soft skills alongside vocational training, and choose to do it, just do a program analysis at the end when the students graduates, sort of what you would call a post-test. And next, you identify the outcomes you want to measure, and your outcomes are, for instance, course completion and job placement. So this, in my view, is short-sighted in two respects. How do you know what the baseline starting results were with respect to the soft skills that they already came in with? And to what extent your program added value to their soft skills? You will, at the very least, need to do a pre-analysis before the program begins. When we talk about randomized controlled trials, we also have a comparison group, but I'm not going to go into that because that probably will take us away into very technical terms. But I will also talk later on about the tools and measures used to measure intangibles like soft skills as opposed to an academic test scores, which I think will be relevant for this discussion. Next, I would say you need to go back and revisit your theory of change to sharpen your outcomes that you should ideally measure. For instance, if you would like to know if this program in any way increased not only employment, but earnings as well, or any such information across any other dimension. And do not always assume that your program will have an impact. The general evidence on impact on skills-based programs, for instance, is quite mixed. Evaluations of some hard skills programs have shown rather disappointing results. Some positive, some have not had any impact. So given this mixed bag and the debate on employable youth that is currently underlying this conference, I think it's important to understand the specific components that may be most effective. And from our literature, we found that you can disentangle various implementation features that are promising. For instance, matching trainees to programs that are best fit for them, recruiting and screening high quality trainers, emphasizing soft skills, and so on. I will not talk more about soft skills now. I can talk about it later. But I'll just end by saying that the research on non-cognitive skills, for instance, that we've done has shown that timing is everything. In terms of what is the right age to intervene and how these correlations have shown to persist in adulthood. And I'll end with saying that a lot of the evidence that we have from in this sector comes from either, I would say, school-based programs or post-college skilling programs. The underlying principles, assumptions, tools, and measures can be applied to your context. So as leaders in your field, I hope you can use some of these insights to tailor it to your context.
Thank you very much. A lot of takeaways from this, but I'll come back to them later. As I said, the format is really that I will ask both the panelists to speak for 5 minutes and then have a question answers. So I'm glad to introduce the second panelist. He's Dr. Prince Augustin. He's Executive Vice President, Mahindra Group for Human Capital and Leadership Development. Prince has enabled development and empowerment of the talent base through coaching, mentoring, and deployment of HR processes at leading corporations such as Castrol, Star TV, Morpan, and now the Mahindra Group. Recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award in HR in 2015, he brings his tremendous experience in talent allocation and leadership to this colloquium. Welcome, Prince, to this colloquium.
Thank you. Thank you.
And, so basically the first 5 minutes, completely free for everybody, whatever you want to say on measuring impact, what should be measured, how it should be measured, any ideas?
Okay. So let me take first that purpose of education, right? The purpose of education, in my view, is to build citizens of a country at the first level. Second is valuable contributors to value creation in the various spheres that they operate in. Therefore, what you have got to look at when you look at education is what sort of capability is it building in people? But I'm talking at a broad level. And when you speak of capability, like how do I understand what capability is, right? First foremost is about knowledge, right? So knowledge in different spheres, because this is a very broad, this thing, be it medicine, be it engineering, be it liberal arts, be it any other sphere of education. You must have a goal key. What sort of knowledge should we be able to build? And knowledge is easily measurable, right? Because you can have a pre-test, post-test, and knowledge will really come out. But you have to find out, keep this knowledge that you have got, does it remain within you, or are you able to put your knowledge in action? So that is what I call skill. Skill is the ability to put knowledge in action. So if you have got computing skills, so you've got knowledge of various computer applications, right? How do you really take those and derive that to write programs, codes, and therefore increase your computing skills? Or if you are a doctor, how do you really diagnose a problem which a patient is have, and therefore prescribe the right set of medicines. So therefore your diagnostic skills come in place because of the knowledge of medicine that you have picked up. Now, if you have not picked up knowledge, you won't be able to have a proper diagnosis. And if you have not had a proper diagnosis and you don't have knowledge of therapeutic segments and pharmacopoeia, there is no way that you can actually prescribe medicines. So therefore, you will find that knowledge becomes the base. Right, and be it engineering. If I want to build a large dam, right, I need to understand there are a lot of engineering knowledge which I will put it into various things. There are thousands of people who are actually involved in making a bridge, and different types of skills gets integrated. Now, if I don't have that level of, and different levels of people come into the whole thing. So therefore, if you don't have that ability to translate your knowledge into action, you won't have the skills. And if you don't have the skills, there is no way that you can really contribute. And the third part is attitude, your mindset. Like, I don't know whether you know the story of King Arthur, right? He was the king of Scotland. He was fighting a big battle with the British. He lost the battlefield. He left the battle, and he was fleeing. He took shelter in a cave. There he saw a spider. Right, the spider fell down 7 times. In the 8th or 9th time, the spider got into the web. So then he realized, see, the spider never gave up. Right, it kept on trying. Right, and the last is attitude. Nobody can train, no educational institute can train you for attitude. Attitude is something that comes up from the environment. Attitude is something that comes up from what I call is teaching point of view. There's a big professor called Noel Tichy at Harvard. He says that every leader, every person should have a teaching point of view. Every teacher should have a teaching point of view. Every subject should have a teaching point of view, right? And therefore, that is how this is. Therefore, the spider had a teaching point of view to King Arthur, that you don't give up. You can go back. He went back into the battlefield. A lost battle he won, right? And that was the victory of Scotland. So similarly, what sort of attitude do you come? This is something which nobody can measure it. Like, we hire thousands of people in our in our organizations. Not all grow up, because everybody is given the same level of input by us, right? But only 10% or 15% grow up, because these people have an attitude of winning. They have an attitude of overcoming obstacles. They have an attitude of making a difference. Now, this is something that you have got to build. There's no educational institute can really teach you. Next is in terms of perspectives, right? Your worldview, right? This no education institution can teach you, or no educational program can really give you, So when you are in your, this is how the Indian education system differs from that of US and Europe, because there they bring practical. Because I was seeing my son, if my son has done his graduation in India, he would never have got it, because he's a very creative fellow. He needs to see application. So when they ask him to do analysis of a case, they tell him, you go into the market, find out how different companies are operating, and then come and share with us the concept that these companies, along with the theoretical this thing. So they combine theory and practice together, and therefore there is a lot of imbibing that takes place. Therefore, your absorption level is very, very high. So the new education policy which the government has put in place, they're actually trying to improve the quality of education, right? So what I can broadly say is that whatever the organizations teach you, or whatever you attempt to learn, unless you don't have a attitude of absorption, unless you don't have an attitude of actually making use of the knowledge at the right time, there is no way that you can actually say that I have created an impact on the org. Like, if you take driving, right? It has to become a very subconscious capability. Therefore, conscious knowledge has to be stored in the mind and converted to a subconscious capability. Now, this is where you've got to see how much of shift which is taking place from conscious capability to subconscious capability. Now, if you're able to, this is what the educational system really teaches you. It gives you conscious knowledge. Now, that conscious knowledge will remain stored in your gray matter. And when you face a situation, you should be able to quickly respond to that. If you are able to do that, then I would say the impact is high. If you're not able to do that, the impact is low, right? So at the first instance, when you are in a school or a college or educational program, you are very impressed, because what happens is the classroom is good, teacher is good, you will say, I have picked up a lot of things. But the real impact comes that I should be able to use it 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 2 years from now. What I have learned in my school or college, I actually use it even today. Like I had a tutor of mine, like I'm in the human resource field, and one of the things is in terms of understanding laws, right? So I did many of the laws at a very grassroots level 30 years back. But the application comes when I take policy decisions now. I'm able to quickly bring that knowledge back into this thing. So that is where I would say that there is an impact, Therefore, impact, you have to look, you have got to create the impact. So you have to be like King Arthur, or you have to take Porus and Alexander, right? Whilst Porus was defeated, Alexander accepted Porus as a worthy opponent, because he says, I have not seen Porus giving up. So Alexander asked Porus, how should I treat you? He said, treat me like worthy of a king, So therefore, it is your mindset. It is your way of thinking that will determine your success, right? And hence, the impact should be that I should be able to use it at the right point of time, at the relevant point of time. And that is what the educational system should really embark upon. I'm not getting into the theory of impact, etc., because I'm just speaking since I understand that you've got different sets of this thing. I'm putting it in a very simple form, that impact depends upon how you look at the situation and what is your attitude to the subject. So when I hire people, what do I look for? I cannot look for anything great, I look at in the subject matter, how much knowledge does the person have. I also look in terms of in the current affairs, what does the person have? Then I get into the subject knowledge, right, of whichever topic is. If I'm hiring a marketing person, I will look at his marketing knowledge. If I hire an engineering person, I will look at his engineering knowledge. Then I will look at how does he or she apply it in a current context, and how he or she views it in an overall geopolitical scenario. Right now, if you are able to do it, and if educational system is able to gear up towards that, I would say it has really created an impact and is adding value, and you would become great citizens of the country and people who create value.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me come back to Shobhini, and I'll come back to you later. You talked about, randomized controlled trials for measuring impact. And I know you don't want to get into too much of science behind it, because that's probably not the focus here. But can you give us some inkling? Because see, when we talk about RCTs in medical domain, we talk about tens of thousands of people being involved in a trial. And in education, you will never find in an intervention that we are talking about tens of thousands of people. My class size is typically 100, 200 or things like that. And to figure out that people, we have taken care of all the similarities, and that there are no multiple things affecting the impact. So can you give a very quick inkling of how this thing will work, this RCTs in measuring impact?
Sure. Happy to do that. So let me actually, I was looking at the questions as well while we were, while Prince was speaking. So there are some questions on soft skills in terms of measuring attitude, measuring growth mindset. So what I can do is I can try and give you some examples from that perspective, because then you will and hopefully you'll understand how we measure, and this will also throw light on how we think about it. So, okay, so I think when I take a step back, when I talk about life skills or talk about soft skills, these are essentially looking, various, whether you look at literature, if you look at OECD, UNICEF, etc., they sort of define this as ability for adaptive and positive behavior to deal with the demands and challenges of everyday life effectively. That's really how they define it. And then, it can go on from everything from perseverance, managing one's emotions, managing one's perceptions, effectively engaging with others, And literature will define socio-emotional skills from cognitive skills differently. Literacy and numeracy, for instance, and we've done a lot of research that we've done as part of JPAL on literacy and numeracy in the last decade, especially on sort of early childhood as well as primary school. Not so much in higher education. I think we're just looking at it from a slightly different perspective, and I'll come to that right now as well. And then, we've also looked at how the research on non-cognitive skills also shows that that childhood becomes an important period for the formation of these sort of non-cognitive skills. So to an extent, I think I do agree with Prince when he says that how can you teach these in when they are like 18 years old or 19 years old? But I think that there are many interventions which have tried to sort of bring these as a part of the curriculum, and we've there's a lot more research that needs to be done on whether these results are sustained, but we have short and medium term outcomes that we've looked at. And then I think why I'm interested in this piece is when I talk about RCTs is because it's also linked with this dynamic changing face of labor market that we see when you think of these as generalizable 21st century skills that sort of transcend both cognitive and technical fields. And we are beginning to see new research around entrepreneurship and skills that we think are relevant for the future of work. Then we need to equip our graduates, right? So I'll give you two quick examples, and in terms of how we measured something like this. So there is one, I'll give you a context as well. So these are going to be not college curriculum, but these are, high school, interventions with adolescent groups of children. So there's one such, intervention that was done in teaching girls negotiation skills in Zambia. And the context for Zambia was that in sub-Saharan Africa, girls tend to drop out of secondary schooling at a much higher rate than boys. And this trend is attributed to parental decisions to invest more in their sons and daughters. So when I think about, I had mentioned this earlier, that we are looking at very specific questions to be able to unpack all of the different gaps and then sort of target what we think needs to be looked at. So if you're looking at dropouts, for instance, and and parental decisions to invest more in their daughters, then that's what we are trying to also solve for. So it's very particular to the context. So while many governments, NGOs, for instance, have tried to encourage girls to stay in school by providing free uniforms, scholarships, etc., one approach that these in Zambia researchers tried was to maybe teach girls negotiation and interpersonal skills to help them advocate for their needs and goals. And in urban Zambia, researchers conducted a randomized evaluation spanning about 4 years. And again, these group sizes are not very large. So here I have to look at what the, I forget the size, sample size, but we've done evaluations, to your point, Professor Sanghi, from about, looking at 2,000, 3,000 children at the most. And we've also looked at much smaller, interventions. It really depends what your unit size of measurement is. It could be a school. We've gone to 400 or 500 schools. We've had situations where we've had 100, treatment schools and 100 comparison schools. So it really depends on what unit of measurement you take here. And then how do you implement that program? So this program, for instance, was called Girls Arise, and it was developed in collaboration with the Ministry of Education in Zambia and a cadre of young university-educated women who had similar backgrounds to the students in these target schools. The interesting thing is that the negotiation curriculum was based upon texts from the US business schools and adapted for the Zambian context. And the training included sort of these interactive sessions and role-playing games, which were designed to teach girls compromises and solutions while negotiating with their partners and trying to see how you're willing to consider each other's interests. So it taught strategies to overcome these compromises as well. And the way it was done was that we had a group of girls who actually got this program, and then we had this negotiation skills program, and we had another group of girls who got something that they were calling a safe space program, which was looking at the independent empowerment abilities of girls. So it's almost like giving a placebo along with this like a placebo pill along with that medicine, which is the negotiation skills. And interestingly, now I'll talk a little bit about how we measured it. So researchers used survey questions to measure the girls' knowledge and application of negotiation skills, and to measure the effect of girls using the negotiation skills, because part of it is self-reported. So you want to be able to validate that as well. Researchers employed a lab and field game, which is essentially you're validating it by action. And in this game, parents made decisions about how to allocate these tokens that were given, which could be redeemed for mobile phone credit or other prizes, or between themselves and their daughter. And what we find is, there were a series of actions that were done as a part of this curriculum. Overall, we find that the negotiation training improved the negotiation skills for the girls significantly over their welfare outcomes, particularly among girls with higher ability. So several months after the classes ended, girls in the negotiation group scored better in their understanding of negotiation tactics than girls in the safe spaces. And it also improved their welfare on an index that we measured, measuring whether the girl had ever been pregnant, as well as their education outcomes, school attendance, test scores, and so on. And the results from those investment game that we saw, where they had to give the token and you negotiate with your parents to spend it on you vis-a-vis buying a mobile phone, we found that the girls demonstrated, the results saw that the girls who had received negotiation training were able to improve their welfare when they could communicate with their parents, suggesting that training helped influence their parents' decisions. And then now, at least now, they've sort of introduced a revised life skills curriculum across multiple grades throughout the country. And then, I'll talk a little bit about the growth mindset as a quick second example. So research around these, and all of these have been randomized evaluations where we have a comparison group and a treatment group who gets the program. So researchers found that, efforts to change students' belief in their ability to learn, which is focusing on perseverance, is linked to, sort of a fixed or a growth mindset. So students with a fixed mindset believe that are those who believe that intelligence and ability are fixed, and they might avoid academic challenges or lack resilience against setbacks. But the growth mindset, or a belief that these traits can be improved with effort, may encourage students to work harder and persevere through challenges. And so there were a series of interventions that were done, and students learned about the brain's potential to grow and change through dedication, hard work on challenging tasks, finding the right learning strategies, and seeking assistance from others. And this was aimed at sort of counteracting the belief that intelligence or traits are fixed. Interestingly, students, I tell you in terms of how it was measured, where students were introduced to a website with individual logins and randomly assigned to the mindset intervention or the comparison conditions, which is the treatment and the control group, to be used during normal school time. And all students had to do this sort of online reading and writing exercises over, say, 2 sessions of 45 minutes, so say 2 weeks apart. And then there was a third session, which was actually designed to capture familiar levels of school activity to test for perseverance. It involved a multiple algebra test, very challenging questions that students were encouraged to try and answer as many as possible, just to see how much they persevere or how much effort they put in. And the measurement was done using an approach which defines perseverance as a repetitive choices as opposed to a fixed ability, where a student with high perseverance is someone who's consistently choosing who is choosing the more challenging tasks and exerting higher effort. So this sort of approach, it sort of looks at developing sensitivity to beliefs about returns to effort taken away, over a period of time. And then we measured it through survey questionnaires. We measured it also through data collected on students' interactions with these computer programs to see what they were choosing, and subsequent tests to measure the impact on the test scores and their effort. And what we found was that perseverance can be shaped by their beliefs in their ability to learn. Helping students change their mindset about their intellectual abilities could be a way to improve student learning outcomes, and a cost-effective one. So we need to do long-term research on this. This is obviously a shorter-term program that was done, but there are many examples like these where you're using not only a very technical field like randomized controlled trials to be able to look at impact and across various anti-poverty programs that you're measuring, but also to be able to apply it to these soft skills. So we've done things like simulations involving time management, and things like that, self-control, empathy, critical thinking, and we've also measured these across various attributes, not only self-reported, but through these sort of case studies, through an action, through an intervention, to see how how they're responding to it. And then, of course, we're using objective task-based measures to sort of capture how they respond. So which looks at grit, perseverance, self-agency, and so on and so forth.
Thank you, Shobhini. Prince, I'll come back to you with a question. You talked about some of the impact is very long term. That some of the things that you learned in school are helping you today. And you also talked about, something like attitude, very difficult to or almost impossible to measure, but you sense it when they're working with you and so on. So I was wondering, suppose we were to do this kind of thing in a large organization like Mahindra or Infosys or TCS and so on. You take 20,000 people to join you in a year. You look at them over 5-year period, 10-year period, and then you say, what are the people who are more successful? Is there some commonality between them? Is there certain colleges whose alums are doing better in these organizations under these conditions, right? Because I think that way, if we are able to, so we may not be able to measure the impact of an individual course or a small intervention and so on, but an overall measurement of how a college is doing, could be done in this way, that how their students or alums are doing at the end of 5 years or 10 years. So, how would you, so I don't have, and I've talked about this with, Mr. Premji, I've talked about this with Mr. Narayan Murthy, and no organization really wants to release this data. So firstly, will this data work? I mean, if every organization were to say that we hired so many people from this college 5 years ago, they are doing so well, will this data, help in improving the quality of education? Because people would like to be going to those colleges, and other colleges will like to replicate what those colleges are doing. And why this data is not released? So these two questions.
So let me just tell you, it'd be a rude shock for everybody. Every degree has an expiry date. The day you pass out of your college, the degree has expired. Then you come into a new this thing. I've seen that people who generally come from good educational institutions, right, do well. Now, why do they do well? See, first is their training creates an upbringing for them. Second is the schools and colleges have already sieved a lot of people, right? And they are taking best amongst the lot. So when you bring them to an education, to a corporate, they are bound to do well, But if you have taken a large population, I've seen people from premium engineering colleges and people from not so premium engineering colleges. Not so premium people actually put extra effort. There is some level of what is known as complacence that says, because I've come from a great engineering college or a great thing, I've got a birthright to do well. In a corporate, there is no birthright to do well, right? You are judged every day based upon your contributions and the value. So people with adversity actually come with that extra effort. And I've seen that you do a study of all this thing. It is not the top MBA people who are actually heading organizations, right? So some are just pure graduates or pure engineering professionals, right? Similarly, why organizations don't release this? There is no science which says that because you are passed out from college A, college B, or college C, that it is a certificate for success. There's a lot which the person himself thinks. That Alvin Toffler had said, illiterates of today are those who do not know how to read or write, but are those who do not know how to learn and unlearn, right? Therefore, whatever I have learned, it will become totally irrelevant. If you take the pandemic today, it has given us the importance for getting into digital savviness. Now, people who pick up digital savviness actually move faster than others, right? So therefore, this is a bias that we have, that people from good colleges alone can do well in corporates. Everybody does well, provided you have the, what I told, attitude, you have the knowledge, and you have the skills, Therefore, if you look at the corporate sector, primarily looks at people who have the ability to, who have the need to win and the right to win, right? And they are able to pick up, because when people pass out of college, it just gives them an entry point, We have got to actually reformat their minds, right? And make them adaptable. Whatever you learn in engineering, it gives you a perspective. It gives you an approach. It does not tell you how to work, because practically things are very different in a corporate world. So then the organization trains you up. Therefore, if you look at an organizational hierarchy, there is people at the operating level, people at the middle management level, and people at the senior management level. Now, each of these people get different types of inputs. And if you take advantage of these inputs, now there's a science behind all these things. behind this. Not that we do not have a science, like we look at what is the knowledge that has to be given to create awareness in people. And mind you, awareness is the biggest thing. Like my fellow panelists was speaking, perseverance, right? Now, perseverance cannot be taught very easily, right? So you have got to have people with the growth mindset. This is a work done by Carol Dweck, right? She's an American psychologist, which says that people with a growth mindset looks at possibilities, whereas people with a fixed mindset looks at limitations as a way to grow. Now, if I convert the mind from a limitation mindset to a growth mindset, this is what even Peter Sanghi speaks. He says that mindsets are greatest ballparks of transformation. Therefore, organizations, what they do is that they work in terms of creating mindsets. They put a systems approach to ensure that team-based learning is put in place, because individual-based learning does not help at all. Because collectively, the way, if an engine has to move, right, all the bogies, the wheels should move in unison. So therefore, organizations have a science behind looking at how to create development of people, right? Therefore, they design a program. Is a program at an awareness level? Is it a program at an application level? Or is it a program which helps to create new thoughts? So educational institutions actually move up to more or less an application level. It's when you come to a corporate world that you convert application to new wisdoms and new knowledge levels. Then you look in terms of impact. Like there's a famous study which is done by Kirkpatrick, which most of us really adopt. So we look at first impact at a reaction level. Immediately after I put people through a program, what are their immediate reactions? Then I take 6 months to 1 year time to say what are the behavioral shifts that is taking place. Then after a period of 3 to 4 years, I look at what's the behavioral shifts. Is it really translating to top line of the organizations? Now, this is where people from different education institutions contribute very, very differently. Therefore, the myth that if I pass from a great college, I will become, it's a certificate to success is totally not correct, right?
So
anybody and everybody can succeed, provided he has the efforts, provided he has the will, and he has his own application to the greatest extent.
Right. No, I was looking at not in terms of, I understand that, there are some colleges which attract very good students and so on. I was looking at, my belief is that there are colleges which are, what we call tier 2, tier 3 colleges. Some of them are doing different things compared to rest of the colleges, and they may have made a slightly different impact. And therefore, a long-term vision would probably come out differently. But anyway, I think we'll just go for a poll now, where we are going to ask everybody, how does the Indian education system prepare you on a scale from 1 to 5? Or scale strongly agree to strongly disagree. Please do this quickly. And after this, I'm just going to ask last questions from each of the panelists. So please fill up this poll very quickly. Okay. Yeah. So can we have the results? All right. So more people believe that we are not preparing well than agree. Now, how do we? So it is only like 4 minutes left. So 1 minute each. How do we bridge this gap? How do we even decide what interventions we should have based on the fact that a lot of people believe that there is a gap between what academia is doing and what industry needs? Just 1 minute each. First Shobhini and then Prince.
Sure. So I have said this before. I think there's this mixed bag of evidence where this is concerned. There's been a lot of emerging insights from literature that shows that successful training programs, targeting young adults once they've it's not in college but post college, skilling trainings that are by government or private institutions There are a few things that are promising, but we need to look at it a bit more. There is a whole piece of evidence which talks about matching trainees to programs that are the best fit for them. There are, we are looking at how do we retain participants. So, looking at addressing participants' cost of attending these training programs to reduce dropouts, giving some incentives. There's a whole sort of evidence around, screening for better quality trainers, communicating the quality of training better, emphasizing on soft skills. But all in all, I think I will say, and of course, I've mentioned this before, that you need the private sector involvement and the involvement of potential employers in the curriculum development and on-the-job training opportunities. There's a whole, set of things around the gig economy. So 1 minute is difficult to summarize.
No, I know, but I'll move to Prince. Last minute, just we have 1 minute left.
Okay, the first is filtering. When I say, like, if you take up the Switzerland-based one, where at the school level itself, they filter people, right? Now, then second is application of knowledge. So people should have exposure to industry and different fields where they have got to have. Third is career inciting. Like, I have done a workshop with municipal schools, right? About 5,000 children I covered. Nobody knows other than from medicine and engineering. They don't know any other thing, right? So therefore, you've got to change mindsets of parents. You have to build upon them. You've got to give them the array of opportunities that are therefore career counseling at a school level and streaming people to various streams. And then the educational system pulling people based upon their, everybody doesn't have to become a manager. Everybody doesn't have to do this thing. Our country has got opportunities for everything. Therefore, streaming people based on their interest and aptitudes is the and involving them in their interest in the respective field. Yeah. If a person is a musician, he gets involved with a club. A person is.
All right, I'm sorry, Prince. I think.
Yeah. So therefore, it is application-based learning.
Sure.
A link to interest of a student.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you very much, Shobhini and Prince. We had a lot of good discussion, and it turns out, I think if I can summarize it in one line, it is very difficult to measure certain things. It's possible to measure knowledge. It's more difficult to measure skills, and it is very difficult to measure certain things like attitude. But as Shobhini said, there is research which suggests that some of these things may be changing, and we may be able to measure them more than what we believe we can today. Thank you very much. And thanks all the listeners and all the participants for this colloquy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for that very insightful and interesting conversation. Thank you. Thank you all three of our panelists.